Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here. It is December 8th, Friday, 2023, and I am John Broadbent, your host of UnWoke Academy. And I have here a few things to share with you. Call them props. I have props. So one is this pen, and this, if you've seen the movie Office Space, I've been excited for years to have this nice little red stapler. I won't bother. I won't hit you with my imitation of the guy from Office Space, which it's a very funny movie. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. But so yeah, I've got some really nice scissors. These are very sharp. They cut well, and I've got some adapters here. I bought a bunch of these. These are just little small adapters that are used for um, electronics. So I picked those up recently. And if you've met with me ever, you've probably seen that we have a bunch of these. These are called Surface Pro. These are computer laptops. So why do I bring all these up? Why am I pointing out pens and staplers and all the stuff that's around us, even paper clips, pads of paper, printed materials? It's because today I would like to talk a little bit about types of economy. So you've probably heard the term service economy and maybe even gig economy, but what about a manufacturing economy or production economy? If you're under the age of, oh, I don't know, I'm going to draw a line of around 40, that may seem like an alien concept to you. Why would we produce something and what the heck is a production economy? Well, a production economy means that an economy within a country creates and manufactures things. And there is something good to be said about manufacturing things, not only from an ecological standpoint for the greenie meanies out there, that the idea that we go to, and we do, in the United States and the West, we rely heavily on cheap labor in primarily Asian nations. And the concept many years ago was that by sending it there, we could help bolster the economies of some stagnating, distressed communities and economies elsewhere in the world. And America had run through a major heyday in production capabilities. We went through the Industrial Revolution and we did some amazing stuff. We produced some of the best engineers in the world and came up with great grand concepts for production. And then we had steel mills and we created stuff. And the big scary thing now, after decades of sort of the doom and gloom narrative about production, is sort of what I call the greenie meanies. The greenie meanies came in along with layers of regulatory environment and three-letter agencies and government and politicians that were pressured into making America and the West, to a very large extent, a very difficult and inhospitable, I think it's unhospitable area for production. And so all of the jobs that went along with making stuff, all the things that we rely on, from appliances to tape and office supplies and printed materials and electronics and you name it around us, to a very, very large extent, it all gets sent elsewhere. And primarily that was done under the auspices of saving the planet, because for generations now, we've had different things that the greenie meanies can point at and say, well, you can't build that thing here. You shouldn't do that thing because you'll harm the environment. And it's everything from do the thing and build. If you build this facility, then some sort of indigenous snail might be disrupted, and some bird that relies on the snail for its primary food source might be thrown off course, and whatever. It's just an endless parade for generations now of inhibiting the growth of small business in the United States and making it inhospitable. I'm pretty sure it's inhospitable, making it go overseas. So all of that means of production has gone to places like China. Well, now we're finally coming around and waking up to the very real notion that China is not a friend. China is not an ally. And China, the Chinese Communist Party. And I want to draw a distinction. I'm going to pause there for a moment because I happen to know a great number of wonderful, very, very patriotic Chinese immigrants into the United States who love all the freedoms. And they are oftentimes, I hate to say it, but more patriotic and love America more than many current young generation Americans because they've experienced just the horrors and difficulties of being in a communist country. When I say China, I'm referring to the Chinese Communist Party, which I have no love for. So the Chinese Communist Party really has the thumb screws on all elements of society, and they keep labor really, really low by utilizing slave labor within China. And they're not the only ones. There are places all over the world. But here's the crazy thing. If we're going to be honest about it, and expecting honesty from the greenie meanies is probably too much to ask for, but the harm and production to the harm and damage to the environment, if it exists, is probably many-fold higher by sending the production of those things to another place in the world, because then once they're produced in environments where they have very little economic and environmental standards, and all you have to do is look at the juxtaposition of the U.S. push to eliminate energy, as we really are. We're eliminating energy production in the U.S., which is ludicrous. But at the same time, China is growing energy production facilities at a rapid rate. And then, so the same thing with the means of production. So if it harms something to mold plastic into this shape of this little pen that I'm holding here, or to create and mine for the metals that make this neat little red stapler, or these scissors, any of those sorts of things, it creates the same harm elsewhere in the world. And if you hadn't noticed, the world's a big sphere that circles in our environment, and the atmosphere swirls and spins around. It's not different on the other side of the world. It's all part of the same atmosphere and the same ozone layer and all those sorts of things. But then actually you're magnifying it even more by having to package and distribute and ship. So if China, I'm just using China as an example, but they're not the only ones. Let's see if I can read on the bottom of this one. If China happened to be the place that made this red stapler, then however many tens of thousands of these red staplers have to be packaged and put on shipping and cargo containers, and then they have to be shipped all over the world, and then they have to go through ports of import, and then they have to be shipped in. So here's the crazy thing that we just seem to have lost sight of. There certainly is the ability to make this stuff in the United States, which cuts way down on energy for shipping and distribution. Now, there are places out there and people, namely politicians, that make a lot of money off of cheap labor and goods manufacturing, controlling the distribution of supply chain and what can and can't come in or out of the country, etc. If we could break that stranglehold, there is tremendous opportunity and spectacular know-how within the United States to make a lot of stuff. These are hypothetical examples, but there are new things as well, and there are electronics and all that stuff. So anybody, and this is a lot of people, especially in the current young generation, who think, well, we're a service economy, and therefore we're not a production economy, and we don't really make stuff, and that's fine. Well, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of why that can be a major issue. And I'm relaying a story that was given to me recently by a friend who has a machining production company. So his company makes very unique small products that are used in aerospace. And it's a great company, and they do a lot of this production. He found out recently that, and this is secondhand, you'll have to look it up and see if you can find more detail, because I'm going to give you as much as I have. It's not going to be the whole naming names, etc., but this is out there. You can search for it if you want greater detail. But apparently there are some things that are used, just going to call it an ingot. There's a piece of metal that's used routinely by our U.S. Navy. So our Navy needs a constant supply of these things. I'm just going to call it an ingot, as I said. And some time ago, we just sent production of those ingots to China. And so maybe because of a difficult work environment, difficult production environment in the US, maybe it was cheaper. So hoorah, yippee, maybe the Navy saved some money. I'm skeptical because the Navy and our military really not at the local levels, but certainly at the top brass in the Pentagon, they seem to misspend money like nobody's business. And these are the same people, remind you, that are also simultaneously sending money to other countries' military. But don't get me started. I'm on a tangent. Let me get back to the topic. The topic is these ingots. So it turns out that recently the animosity has brewed and developed between China and the United States to the point where now the Navy is scrambling to try and bring the production of those ingots back into the United States. And so they're trying to find the right combination of machining and know-how and parts and the machines themselves that make the things, the people with the technical know-how to make them properly, the material and supply chain to find the metals, I'm assuming metals, and whatever goes into making the ingots, and then get them to the right place, and then once they're produced, to distribute them. So we're having to backtrack because we did some goofy, bad, harmful stuff years ago in sending distribution to China, and now finding that China, relying on China for production of things that our U.S. Navy needs in an environment where we're sort of matching up against their Navy, and there have been some talk of kind of some showdowns between our vessels out at sea. It's just crazy. So I certainly hope that no actual conflict develops between the US Navy and the Chinese Communist Party. But if it were to develop, and if the Chinese Communist Party were to just overnight stop the production and distribution and shipping of those ingots, we're left high and dry. That's terrible. We don't want that. So that brings me into the UnWoke piece and UnWoke investments. So imagine this. If we put our thinking caps on and start really truly asking what we're capable of and what we could be doing and what we should be doing, then all of this stuff, like the production of pens, I actually don't know off the top of my head if there are any American-made pen companies in the United States that make these types of things. I hope that there are still some left. And maybe we should be thinking about finding them, or if they don't exist, organizing, creating, and funding them, and starting some seed money to develop them grassroots at the ground level and make them in the United States. There's nothing stopping us. The only thing that stands in our way, the only impediment, is our imagination, regulators, and funding. Well, I think we've got all of those pieces except maybe the regulation. The regulatory environment is going to be one that's really difficult to change. Let's be candid about that. But we the people. And again, this is parts of this you can take wherever you are in the world. If you're in France or Germany, UK, India, it doesn't matter. Take these concepts and run with them. When I say we the people, I'm not trying to carve out specifically just America. Just like I look universally at all 50 states within the United States of America, I also look globally at the people who have the interest, integrity, and wherewithal to pursue individual personal freedoms and liberties and to build and develop these kinds of things, because the potential is amazing and awesome. It's taking the production capabilities out of the hands of these mega globalist companies and banks. It's finding an avenue around the crushing, closing, helpful environment where small local banks are being closed at rapid rates, which means that the ability of small business to borrow. So I'm putting together a few pieces. Hopefully, you can follow me on this. Not only are we talking about trying to develop community mom and pop businesses, but we're also talking about a vehicle that funds them. At the same time, we're funding them. We're taking money away from the globalist elite who want to micromanage every part of our lives and try to gain control over everything. So these globalist mega managers that own all these banks, ideally, and we can see the writing on the wall. We can see where they would like to get to. They want to get to the point where there are like 4 banks in the world, and they own all 4 of them, and they own each other. And there's a few families own all 4 of those banks, and that's where you go. And if you don't have good cockamamie wackadoodle social credit score, and if you're not doing all the woke green things and the greeny meanie stuff, and if you're non-compliant in any way, or if they just decide that they don't like what you're doing, like farming and agriculture, they can just turn off your money. Well, what we're talking about at UnWoke is creating avenues to use our money instead of giving to those big multinational globalists, giving it to local community businesses. And here's an important expression to remember. In my world, growing up and working in finance, we have this expression, remember it always. Once it gets to Wall Street, all the money's been made. I'll say that again. Once it gets to Wall Street, all the money has been made. That means that those small startup companies some of them are going to fail. And you have to be prepared for that. It's not like some sort of magic formula where everyone like makes massive money off of everything. But a big portfolio of a whole bunch of really small investments, all it takes is for a few of them to really take off. And there's big money in that. That's why investment banking and all that stuff exists. And those people that run those things, those investment banks, they would love to have absolute control. They want to be the avenue through which those startups have to go. So you think, so what's a good example? Well, there are TV shows where you get a whole bunch of these big shot billionaires, and they sit around, people come in and pitch them on their ideas, and then they give these proposals that they'll take over big chunks of the company in exchange for lending them $400,000 or whatever the cash needs are. Imagine if we replicate that, but instead of a line of a bunch of billionaires that want to make more billions, what if it's we the people? And instead of sending our money away to these far left companies and causes via things like our 401k, we create those funding vehicles, pooled funding ourselves. And we create the opportunity to build the next generation of businesses within the United States or wherever you're listening from to make things like this. We can do this. They don't have to come from Southeast Asia and other countries. We can make these things. Here's this. What is this? It's called a USB-C adapter. It's a USB 3.2 5 gigabyte. I don't know. I was looking at a list and somebody said that this is something that I needed. And so I went into an electronics store and I bought this thing. You can hear the unwrapping and crinkling. Oh, it's good. It's one of those blue. I understand that blue is the faster speed. Whatever. It's USB. It's a tiny little plastic and metal thing. And I paid $8 for this little thing. I don't know if it's worth $8, but that's what I'm told the going rate is. So this was, I'm going to try to illustrate a point here. And let's see if it says on here where it was made. It was made in China. Good. Okay. So there's my point. So this was made in China. And some Chinese company made a bunch of money off of this. Or actually, who knows the dynamic over there. It's hard for me to explain communist workplace and environment. But it, for all I know, some slave labor was used, and the Chinese Communist Party got another $6 from me, and the rest of it is all goes into shipping and distribution and whatever. So why wouldn't we talk about creating a company in the United States that makes these little things? Apparently they're needed, they're valuable, people want them, they're on shelves in stores all around us. Let's do that. Let's make these things. Let's talk about what it would take to move the United States back from a service economy, which is not doing us well. There's not very much service to be done when all of the means of production, or clearly not all of it, I mean most of the means of production, has been shipped overseas. And in addition to that, this is kind of a side note, it really bothers me, but the capture of intellectual property, intellectual patent and patent law is horrible. We're losing patents at an alarming rate to countries like China, and the Chinese Communist Party taking over not just the means of production, but the rights to produce those things. So the next wave of stuff like this little USB-C adapter, why don't we talk about funding those, we the people style, grassroots, and creating companies like that for us, by us, and come back to a production economy, because that's where the money is. We got the skill, we get the wherewithal, and we have the impetus now, especially because tensions are rising between China and the United States. Let's ponder that more in another episode. Today, you've been listening to Jonathan Broadbent. I am your host of UnWoke.Academy. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next exciting episode.